Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to discuss this question. Are the vegetable oils, the seed oils, the primary drivers of overweight, obesity, diabetes, and virtually all of our chronic diseases? Coronary heart disease, strokes, cancers, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, Alzheimer's disease, age-related macular degeneration, autoimmune diseases. The list goes on and on. So we're told that these vegetable oils are heart healthy, right? In fact, the most prestigious nutrition institutions in the world, Harvard School of Public Health, Mayo Clinic's Nutrition Department, Tufts University Nutrition Department, American Heart Association, Cleveland Clinic, on and on, all tell us these highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils are heart healthy, right? In fact, it says right on the label, heart healthy. Right? So how can we question it? Why do they tell us this? There's one reason. They lower our cholesterol. Well, guess what? So does arsenic. Right? Doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, right? So I'm here today to defend the hypothesis that these are the most dangerous products in our food supply, bar none. 12 years of scientific investigation and following the science leads me to this conclusion. You'll have to make up your own mind. So, let's begin here. Now, some of you have seen me present this, but I'm going to give a little bit of history. It just takes about 4 minutes of what started in the US and then has spread around the world. But the US has led the way in this deadly health transition. So in the 19th century, regarding heart disease, coronary heart disease, there was 8 papers in the entire century. 8, right? There's probably been 8 papers published on coronary heart disease in the last hour, right? And but 8. In fact, there's only 2 of those were thrombotic coronary heart disease, in other words, heart attacks. 1912, James Herrick published the first known heart attack in the US. First known heart attack documented with autopsy evidence. 1930s, coronary heart disease became the leading cause of death. It was virtually unknown 20 years earlier in 1910. So how's this possible? What's going on, right? 2010, 1 out of 3 people, approximately 32%, are dying of coronary heart disease in the US. And as you know, coronary heart disease is the leading cause of death worldwide. So the increase looks something like that red line right there. All right, how about cancer? So in the United States, in Boston in 1811, cancer took the lives of 1 in 188 people. 1900, cancer took the lives of 1 in 17 people in the US. 2010, again, it's almost 1 in 3. I think it's 31.2% deaths due to cancer. So cancer deaths look something like this. This is a 62-fold increase in cancer deaths in 200 years. How about type 2 diabetes? So in 1890, diabetes affected 0.0028% of the population. That's 2.8 per 100,000, an unfathomable number by today's standards, right? 1935, diabetes affected 0.37% of the population. It had already risen 132-fold from the 1890 level. Something's going on, right? We know something's changing, right? So this trend continues. I won't go through all the numbers. 2016, we're at 13% prevalence of diabetes in the US. This is a 4,643-fold increase in diabetes in 126 years. Now, if diabetes had doubled during this time frame, that would be statistically significant. It went up 4,643-fold. Okay, how about macular degeneration, the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide? In between 1851 and 1930, this 80-year period of potential discovery, there was less than 50 cases of macular degeneration in all the world's literature. 2020, 196 million people affected with AMD. As of 2004, 14 million of those people were either blind and or severely visually impaired in both eyes, all right? So the increase looks something again like this red line right here. All right, how about Alzheimer's and dementia? So the first known case published by Dr. Alzheimer himself, 1908. I think there was 4 cases in 1910. By 1948, there was 150 cases in the world's literature. Where are we today? 2023, 55 million cases. 10 million new cases per year, 1 new case every 3 seconds. How about obesity in the United States? 19th century, Scott Allen Carson's work showed us that obesity affected 1.2% of men age 18 to 80. 1.2%. Okay? By 1960, when we all thought we were lean and fit and healthy, obesity had risen 11-fold to 13%. So this trend continues. By 1998, I think that is 30.5%, and this trend continues. We're at 42. That should be 42.5%. I'm sorry. In 2018, obesity. Right. So obesity since the 19th century has risen 35-fold in 118 years. So why? Why is this happening? Well, very simply, in just a few seconds, sugar's been on the increase for several centuries, all right? In fact, sugar increased 17-fold just between 1822 and 1999. Sugar is a nutrient-deficient food. 1866, the first seed oil was introduced in the United States, cottonseed oil. The U.S. had never seen a seed oil before that. 1880, we got refined white wheat flour, nutrient-deficient food. 1911, Procter & Gamble introduced good old Crisco, trans fats, right? That's processed food. That's it. That's really all it is today, too. It's those 4 things. 2009, 63% of the American diet made up of those 4 foods, and chronic diseases look something like this. They're through the roof, right? So I think, this is what I usually go back to in terms of looking at what are the main problems. So again, I'm a public health advocate is what I think of myself now. So I'm trying to reach people on a broad scale. Here's the big deal though. Total vegetable oil consumption. This is our published data from 2017. 1865, we had no vegetable oils in the food supply. 0. The only oil would have been trivial amounts of olive oil. Trivial amounts. But where are we? 2010, 80 grams per person per day. 80 grams is 720 calories worth. That's 32% of US caloric intake. Now, this doesn't account for losses. So there's some losses. But the typical person's consuming around 1/4 of their diet or more with vegetable oils. Now, think of this. 1900, when we were lean and fit and healthy and had no heart disease and no macular degeneration, no diabetes, almost no diabetes, right? Those conditions were rare. 99% of added fats came from animal fat. By 2005, 86% of added fats came from vegetable oils. In other words, the vegetable oils almost completely supplanted and replaced the added fats in the diet. Now, here's the dietary guidelines, which often, were blamed for quite a number of years on this problem. But the dietary guidelines introduced in 1980 told us to go low fat, which we Americans did. We dropped our fat consumption, but notice the vegetable oil consumption is still going up. So we're consuming more vegetable oils, less fat, meaning less animal fat, right? Okay, what did this do to our omega-6? Everybody here probably already knows vegetable oils are rich in omega-6 linoleic acid. So in 1865, we modeled the diet. And how much omega-6 did we consume? 2.4 grams on average. That's 1.1% of calories. Now, that doubled by 1909 because we had cottonseed oil first and then soybean oil by 1909. So that doubled. Now our omega-6 is 2%. By 1999, 7% of calories in 1999 and 29 grams a day of omega-6 in 2008. That's 11.8% of calories. All right, so that's an 11-fold increase in omega-6 in about 145 years. 11-fold. Omega-6 linoleic acid, the primary omega-6 fat, was 1/90th of consumption in 1865. Where are we today in 2008? It's 1/8 of calories. So that makes this a poison. Why? Because of the dose. And we'll get to that momentarily. So a lot of Americans look like this. But their omega-6 consumption as of 2008, 11.8%. It might be higher today, right? But this means these people, it's not their fault, they're victims of our food supply. No different than the fact that the 1900 or 1910 Americans who had never had a heart attack, who didn't know Alzheimer's, who didn't know macular degeneration, who weren't obese, who weren't diabetic, they just ate what was in the food supply, right? So that's what these people are doing. What's wrong with vegetable oils? As I mentioned, they're very high in omega-6 fat, 20 to 78% typical, whereas animal fats usually run about 1 to 2.5% omega-6, all right? So these vegetable oils, they accumulate in our bodies and they become pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic through advanced lipid oxidation end products, and nutrient deficient. They have no vitamins A, D, or K2 in any vegetable oils, even the healthy ones like coconut oil, palm kernel oil, those, and even olive oil. No vitamins A, D, or K2, right? They're missing that. This is the perfect recipe for metabolic disease and physical degeneration, period. Okay, so let's talk about 3 native traditional population studies. In 2020 at Low Carb Denver, I introduced this idea that native traditional populations, their diets contain less than 2% omega-6 linoleic acid. And because I've examined a bunch of them, I'm going to show you 3 of them today, but Western diets run 7 to 12% omega-6 because of primarily vegetable oils. There's other factors, but I won't have time to get into that. So I want to briefly mention this population. Some of you may have seen me review this before. The inhabitants of Tukasenta, Papua New Guinea, they're highlanders. They live at 6,500 to 8,000 feet. They were studied by Professor Sinnott and White out of Australia, brilliant professors who studied them for 4 years, and they found that this is what their diet was. Sweet potatoes accounted for more than 90% of their calories. They're not vegan. They would occasionally feast on pork, rarely on chicken. These guys are fit. They look good, right? And this is their diet between 1966 and 1968, 94.6% carbohydrate, 3% fat, 2.4% protein. This, I assure you, at least for me, this is the absolute highest carbohydrate, lowest fat, lowest protein diet in the world. And yet, this is what Sinnott and White found about them. In 4 years of study, there's not been a hunter-gatherer, subsistence agriculturist type study anywhere that was more comprehensive, as far as I'm aware, than this study. This is what they said. Population was lean, physically fit, and in a good nutritional state. Absence of obesity and hypertension. No diabetes or gout. Ischemic heart disease was rare, if not absent, and they had no macular degeneration. None. Right? But I'm going to back up just for a second. If I left it right there, I need to put this in here. The fact is, they weren't in perfect shape, though. They had their dental condition was terrible. They had very poor dentition, and arthritis was common. Why? Because I think they had so little animal fat. They had so few fat-soluble vitamins, especially A and K2. I think this was a significant problem for them. But compared to us, they were healthy. Of course, they had no refined flours or sugars, and of course, no vegetable oils. No traditional population has vegetable oils. They're a product of the Industrial Revolution. So what was their omega-6? 0.6%. You won't get lower omega-6. This is critically and fundamentally important, and I'm going to hit this several times to drill this point home. Western diets, again, 7 to 12% since 1990 is where the world is. Next, let's talk about the Inuit, because they're carnivores, all right? Their diet, traditionally, seal meat and blubber, whale meat and blubber, caribou, reindeer, and then tiny, tiny amounts of vegetable food, typically just whortleberries and seaweed in their very short summer, all right? But they gorge on fat, and they're healthy, right? Just like this article says. They really were. So this is August and Marie Crow, scientists, who won many honors for their work. In 1908, they completed an expedition on the diet metabolism of the so-called Eskimos of Greenland. I don't use the term Eskimos, that's considered pejorative today. this is what they said. The Eskimos are probably the most exquisitely carnivorous people on Earth, surviving for long periods absolutely without vegetable food. They said the diet does not appear to have any injurious effects whatever upon the people. They did not find heart disease or cancer. They made no mention of that in their studies. So here's the diet. So they had lots of calories, 2,559 per day, 44% protein, 47% fat, 8% carbohydrate, half of which came from the glycogen in the freshly killed meat that they were eating. All right, so it's a high fat and high protein diet, obviously. All right, so then their study was followed by this man, Arctic explorer Vilhjalmur Stefansson. And Stefansson lived among the Inuit for 10 winters and 13 summers between 1906 and 1918. His goal, to find out did they have cancer, because it was said for decades that the Inuit, the Eskimos, did not have cancer. Stefansson finally published this book shortly before he died in 1960. And in this book, he wrote this: cancer was not to be found among Eskimos who still lived native style. They could not find it. This was so convincing, the American Museum of Natural History even wrote this in 1914. Cancer is said not to be found among the Eskimos. So they didn't have a heart disease, they didn't have cancer, and as far as we look clear to 1962 to 64, when they're still on their native traditional diet, diabetes affected 0.06% of Greenlanders. That's about 2 or 3 people out of 4,249. That's how rare it was on their native traditional diet, okay? But again, they had no refined flours or sugars, 0 vegetable oils, right? What did that make their omega-6? 0.6%. Same amount of omega-6 percentage-wise as the Papua New Guineans of Tukasinta, who were consuming 3% of their diet as fat. Interesting, right? Okay. Western diets, again, 7 to 12% omega-6 linoleic acid. All right, moving on to South Pacific Islanders. And we're going to look briefly at the Catawbans, which came up earlier this morning. Staffan Lindeberg studied the Catawbans back in 1991. He lived with them for 6 weeks, and he found their diet was very, very different than the previous 2 we talked about. Diet of tubers, fruit, fish, and coconut were their staples. All right, here's what he said about them. Available data suggest rarity or absence of cardiovascular disease, essential hypertension, obesity, and non-insulin-dependent diabetes mellitus in truly traditional ethnic groups. Sudden cardiac death, stroke, and exertion-related chest pain are non-existent or extremely rare in Catawbans. All adults have low diastolic blood pressure, and all are lean, all of them. Right? The intake of oils, margarine, cereals, and sugar is negligible. It was just almost none. Here's the breakdown on their foods. You can see it's low-fat diet, low protein, high carbohydrate, 69%, relatively high. Saturated fat is high, at 17%. Omega-6, less than 1%. So here's the main points. No vegetable oils, omega-6, less than 1% in the Catawba studies. Again, Western diets, 7 to 12%. Are you sick of me saying that yet? No, I'm sure you are. All right. But just today, we've looked at these 3 populations. These Papua New Guineans, 94.6% carbohydrate, Catawbans at 69% carbohydrate, and Inuit Eskimos at 8% carbohydrate. You can continue doing this with all these different populations. It's pretty interesting. But yet all of these populations are healthy, right? What do they eliminate? Vegetable oils, right? That's what they eliminate. This is always true in my opinion. All right, so healthy traditional populations do not have refined flours, sugars, processed foods, or vegetable oils. Of course they don't, right? What about the omega-6? It's 0.6 to 1.7% is what it runs and what I've found so far in these truly traditional populations consuming their native traditional diets. Again, I won't say it. There it is, the omega-6 in Western populations. All right, now quickly, I'm going to talk about Westernized diets, seed oils, and the downfall of these countries: Japan, China, United States, and we've got to do Australia since we're here. All right, so let's look at Japan. because this is one of the most interesting of all countries, in my view, in terms of what we find in their diet. So this is their nutrition transition. I want to show you this. We're going to look basically at the consumption of their food about 1960 versus 2009. So look at their total calories was 2837 in 1960. This is all published data. By 2009, they dropped almost a third of their calories down to 1,850. Carbohydrates were high at 84% in 1960. They end up in 2009 at 56%. Sugar was at 196 calories in 1961, peaked at 384 calories in 1989, and then dropped back down to 282 calories by 2010. That sugar was down 27% between 1989 and 2010. What about the fat consumption? It was 5% in 1960 when they were healthy. In 2009, 27%. So their fat went up more than fourfold. What about the saturated fat? 7%, which is about the lowest in the developed world. All right, here's the interesting thing. The seed oils, 81 calories in 1961, increased all the way to 351 calories by 2010. So it went up 4.5-fold. And by the way, their seed oil consumption was about 2 to 3 grams in 1950, if you went back that far. That's how low they were. Now, I'm going to quickly define sugar because I get this question all the time. Well, people think I'm leaving out corn syrup and high fructose corn syrup. All this data comes from the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Here's their definition. Added sugars include sugars added during the processing of food, such as sucrose and dextrose, foods packaged as sweeteners, such as table sugar, sugars from syrups, which would include, I've added this in, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, maple syrup, etc., and honey and sugars from concentrated fruit or vegetable juices. They continue on this. They state, for most Americans, the main sources of added sugars are sugar-sweetened beverages, baked goods, desserts, and sweets. So this is every kind of sugar. When I say sugar, that means everything you can add to the diet. It's not fruit sugar or vegetable sugar. It's just coming from added sugars, all right? So back to this data. Now we're going to look at, this is just obesity in men only, all right? 16% obesity in 1977, I believe it was. And look where it climbed to, 31.2% by 2009. So obesity doubled while the calories, the carbohydrates, and the sugars all decline, right? But what's the one thing going up? And you can see, look at the vegetable oils versus the obesity. Striking correlation, right? Okay, how about diabetes? So you can see here, diabetes in 1954 in Japan, 0.02%. That's 2 per 10,000. All right, where is it in 2009? 6.9%. This is a 345-fold increase between 1954 and 2007. All right, but look at it. And again, this is while sugar, carbohydrates, and calories are all on the decline, right? Sugar declining since 1989. This data ends in 2007, right? But look what it's in relation to. As you know, with the vegetable oils, the one thing going up. Okay, how about breast cancer? So this is breast cancer, and we see back in 1975, breast cancer incidence was 21.7 per 100,000 people. All right, by 1999, breast cancer incidence was 101.4 per 100,000. So breast cancer went up 5-fold between 1975 and 1999, again, in correlation to the vegetable oil increase. This is macular degeneration, AMD, the leading cause of irreversible vision loss and blindness in people over the age of 50 worldwide. You can see in the late 1970s, macular degeneration affected 0.2% of the population. By 2013, 16.37% of the population over approximately the age of 42 to 50 is affected. So it's up 82-fold between the late 1970s and 2013. Again, while calories, carbohydrates, and sugar go down. But it's, again, striking correlation to the vegetable oils. So here's their omega-6. If we go back to 1960, Over here on the left, you see their omega-6 was 1% of the diet. This is where it should be. Remember I said it should be under 2%, right? And where are they in 2009? 7.8%. So the omega-6 went up 7.8-fold, right? So back here in 1960, they're lean, fit, healthy, practically disease-free, chronic disease-free. In 2009, they're riddled with overweight, obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cancer, and macular degeneration. All while the calories, carbohydrates, and sugars went down. But again, the vegetable oils in this country is the one thing going up. Let's take a look at China. This is really interesting. And again, another what I'd call nutrition experiment in nature's laboratory. That's a term I'm borrowing from Weston A. Price. Okay, first, this is China. Once again, China. Look at the overweight and obesity combined, 15.3% in 1991. This climbed to 42% in 2015. So it almost triples, right? Look at the cancer, 495 per 100,000 in 1990. This is total major cancer incidence, all right? Where does it end up? 1,587 per 100,000 in 2017. So the cancer incidence goes up more than threefold. Now, here's what's interesting. Look how low the sugar is. 2.5% of calories, 60 to 80 calories per day. This is the 8th lowest sugar consumption in the world. All right, and it's not changing, right? It hasn't changed in decades. While all this chronic disease is rising, right? But what about the vegetable oils? 30 calories per day in 1961, 204 calories per day in 2018. All right, so vegetable oils increased sevenfold. Sevenfold increase in vegetable oils is the cause of this. All right, how about the United States? So let's look at our nutrition experiment. This is came from a published paper by Darius Motsfarian at Tufts University, who, by the way, is a believer that we should be consuming vegetable oils. But he published this, and it shows the obesity was 30.5% in 1999 in the US, and it climbed to 42.5% by 2018. And yet, look at the total energy available. It actually is slightly going down. And the total energy consumed, slightly going down, is what they say, is what he concluded. What happened to the energy expended? Their data showed that energy expenditure was up a little bit. So now what's going on? We can't even explain obesity with calories, no matter what you do. And I've been saying this for years, all right? It's not just about calories. So look at the vegetable oils. So back in 1900, when obesity was 1.2%, what was the vegetable oil consumption? 1 gram per day, per person per day, 1 gram. Where were we in 1961? Obesity is 13.4%. It had risen 11-fold. Vegetable oil consumption, 19 grams per day. 2018, obesity is 42.5%. What was the vegetable oil consumption? In 2010, 80 grams a day. So we went from 1 gram in 1900 to 80 grams in 2010. And with that, this obesity. So again, you see the striking correlation. So you say, well, what about the sugar? All right, let's look at that. So here's obesity. Again, 1890, obesity was 1.2% in men. Sugar consumption already in 1890, this is all proven, all published, 211 calories per day, 10.8% of calories in 1890. It was already higher than today's World Health Organization recommendation to consume less than 10% of calories as sugar. 1930, obesity is around 3 to 4%. That's interpolated data, so we don't, we're guessing because the data went from 1900 to 1960. But anyway, it's approximately that. But where's the sugar consumption? In 1930, 499 calories a day, 25% of US caloric intake, a fourth of the diet. This is back when we were pretty darn healthy, right? Now let's just jump all the way to 2018 when obesity is 42.5%. Sugar consumption is 526 calories. It's up 27 calories from the 1930 level. And it's down in terms of percentage. It's 24% because we're eating more food. So it's pretty hard to blame sugar here, right? So obesity shows a striking correlation to vegetable oils almost no correlation, even negative to sugar. If you look at the very end, you can see sugar going down while obesity goes up, and we're gonna hit that here next. So this is, you can see on this graph that obesity was 30.5% in 1999, as we talked about before, 42.5% in 2018. But look at the sugar consumption; it's on the way down, right? So again, calories are down a little bit, sugar's down a little bit. What about carbs? Okay, so sugar falling since 2004 while obesity escalates. Here's carbohydrates in the United States. So you can see that that's 1997. Obesity is 29%. Look where obesity is in 2013, 38%. But the carbohydrates are on the decline. So again, we've got a little decline in calories, we've got declining sugar, recent, and we've got declining carbohydrates, recent, again, while obesity and diabetes, as you'll see next, go through the roof. So here's diabetes versus sugar, because you've already seen vegetable oils versus this, and we have limited time. So here's the diabetes, 0.37% in 1935. Sugar is already 22.5% of the caloric consumption. All right, let's jump to 2016. Diabetes, 13%. What's sugar? 24%. The sugar's barely changed. Now, if you look at the actual numbers, sugar's up 86 calories from 440 to 526 between these two time frames. But we're consuming more food in 2016, so that as a percentage, it's just up a little bit. It's up 1.5%. But diabetes goes up 35-fold. It's an increase of 3,400% in prevalence, diabetic prevalence, right? Here's the problem, which we talked about before. Look at the omega-6 climbing from 1.1% all the way to 11.8% by 2008. This is the problem. But we had a data analyst run a regression analysis, and because obviously sugar and vegetable oils are both climbing at the same time as obesity and diabetes, right? So the data analyst that looked at this wrote this: we assess whether this positive effect of sugar remains significant once vegetable oil consumption is adjusted for. And he wrote, in such a two-factor linear regression model, there is no significant effect of sugar consumption on the prevalence of obesity and diabetes at all. No effect once you control for the vegetable oils. He said, at the same time, vegetable oil consumption's positive effect is significant at any imaginable significance level commonly used in scientific literature, p less than 0.0001. This was done by an outside scientist, not associated with my group, our group, Eugene Antipov, PhD from Dubai. All right, let's look at Australia. This will be the last one. So first, I want to mention, here's the obesity in Australia, 9% in 1980, climbs to 31.3% in 2018. But look at the sugar, nearly a steady decline since 1961, at least for a few decades, right? And then it sort of levels off. But look at the vegetable oils. 78 calories per day in 1961, 575 calories per day in 2018. Now let's look at diabetes, and there's a short window of evidence here, but the diabetes is not as high as I would expect. 3.3% nevertheless in 2001, and 4.9% in 2018. Okay? Is it the carbohydrates, though? Well, the carbohydrates, as you can see, are also on the decline while the obesity goes through the roof. So the carbohydrates are down 200 or 300 calories per day during this, this time frame since the 1960s until, or at least around the early 2000s. You can see carbohydrates have gone down. So we ran a regression analysis for Australia, too. And this is the data scientist's words. We assess whether this positive effect of sugar remains significant once vegetable oil consumption is adjusted for. In such a two-factor linear regression model, there is no significant effect of sugar consumption on the prevalence of obesity and diabetes at all. Sounds very similar to the US, right? At the same time, vegetable oil consumption's positive effect is significant at any commonly used significance level, p less than 0.001 on this one. Okay, so in conclusion, I would submit to you that the industrial seed oils are the primary drivers, not the only drivers, but the primary drivers of obesity, diabetes, and most all of our chronic disease. I would submit that non-processed carbohydrates, especially when they're organic and they're unmodified, do not play a role in obesity, diabetes, and most chronic disease. Refined sugars and flours, these are definitely, at the very least, nutrient deficient foods. Sure, there's a lot more to be said about that, but I think these should be greatly minimized or eliminated. But my suggestion is, of course, is an ancestral diet, which includes all of these kinds of foods potentially, all right, if they're, when well tolerated. All right, so, but take home point, whether you're carnivore or you're vegan, or keto or low carb or high carb or whatever you choose, or you're just an omnivore, the omega-6 applies to every single one of us. This is the most important consideration, I believe. So this is our mantra: seed oil free is the key to being disease free. So now we had this made, all right, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this down here at the bottom says chronic metabolic poison, which is like it does on this. And this is what you'll see on the cover of our book. So burn this into your brain, if you would, and spread this message, because this is what I believe. I've been saying this for 4 years, and I will continue to. I think that that's how dangerous these are to us. This is our new book that just came out a couple of months ago, The Ancestral Diet Revolution. I'll just say this is a shameless plug because 100% of royalties benefit our nonprofit foundations, Ancestral Health Foundation and Cure AMD Foundation, these organizations, from which none of us that work for these organizations take any compensation at all. We're in this for the people. And so I want to thank you, Dr. Rod Taylor, wherever you are, and I want to thank everybody that's part of the Low Carb Sydney and the Low Carb Down Under organizations. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.